Hey, everybody. My name's Jason. I am 54 years old, and at 52, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer that had metastasized to my spine. And on this channel, we talk about it a lot. Yeah, so I just got back from the Zero Prostate Cancer Support Group Leader Conference, and I wanted to share some insights, some things we talked about. I took notes this time. I didn't take notes last year. I regretted that. So we're going to talk about imaging. We're going to talk about MRIs, like MRIs and PSMA PET scans. We're going to talk about AI. That came up as a topic. That was interesting. We're talking about, we'll just start talking about it. All right, let's start with the imaging because that was interesting. They said that imaging is getting smarter. So PSMA PET scans are now the standard for detecting metastatic disease. They said they're way more sensitive than CT or bone scans, which I think after we go through this, we already know that, right? The challenge is how do we get our insurance to recognize that we need a PSMA PET scan? Because a lot of men are getting diagnosed. They're getting diagnosed through a biopsy that it wasn't done with an MRI, not getting they'll get a CT scan and maybe a bone scan, but they're not getting a PSMA PET scan. And when asked to do it, the insurance says, no, we're not going to pay for that. Well, the PSMA PET scan is in the standard of care. So there is a standard of care guidelines called the NCCN, and I can't remember what that stands for. I should have written that down. But the NCCN guidelines is what the doctors follow to when they diagnose us. I did a video on this. I can't remember how long ago, where I walk you through what the guidelines are, what they look like, and how to. Anybody can sign up, can create a free account and go through the guidelines and see what that looks like. And what you can do is on an appeal, work with your doctor and say, this is what the NCCN guidelines say to do. That was brought up during we had a panel of doctors up there. We had a medical oncologist who was also a radiation oncologist. We had a urologist, and I can't remember what the third doctor's credentials were, but they were all three doctors tied to prostate cancer. And with a lot of good information. And they said to appeal. If you don't get approved for a PSMA PET scan, appeal. And we should be getting, if you are metastatic and you're monitoring progression, you can get up to 2 PET scans a year. Yeah. MRIs. Let's talk about MRIs. The MRI targeting has changed the game, so to speak. That sounds corny. Has changed there used to be a problem of over-treatment and underdiagnosing. MRIs have changed that. So now we do an MRI to find out where to target the biopsy. So the example that was used, one of the urologist, I think, used, is think of a rotten apple, right? You don't necessarily know how rotten the apple is, and you can't really tell from the outside. You just know somewhere in there, based on a bruise maybe on the outside, that there's a bruise somewhere in that apple. Now, what a traditional diagnosis would be just taking 12 needles or up to 23 or 24 needles and just sticking them in there randomly throughout the apple, and then looking at the cores that it pulls out. And some of those cores might hit that bruising, but it may not hit the worst part or the most aggressive part of that bruising. So what we do is we do an MRI and we look and see where that bruise is throughout the apple. And then we can target the needles in that bruise, and we get a much better picture of how the disease is actually progressing. You get a better sample of how much of it is really, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, and it makes it better for your treatment plan. The MRI isn't 100%. What I mean is you can get an MRI that doesn't show the cancer. That is possible. An MRI, they say, has a 91% predictive value. So that means if your scan is clear, that's only a 91% chance that you don't have cancer. It's not perfect, but it's a good start. And if you've had a biopsy without an MRI, so let's say you started the diagnostic path and you got the biopsy, the blind biopsy, which they shouldn't be doing anymore, still ask for an MRI. Okay, that's important. That was one of the things that the panel of doctors brought up is just because you didn't get an MRI before the biopsy doesn't mean you don't need one. Get the MRI anyway. There's still imaging there's still things that can show up on the imaging that are important. So speaking of biopsies, we talked about transperineal versus transrectal. So basically their answer was mixed. Transperineal can make the patient feel safer because you're not going through the colon, which has risks of infection. There's a couple groups of studies that have been done on transperineal versus transrectal, and one group of studies showed that, you have a reduced risk with the transperineal, where they go in through the perineum rather than through the colon and through the wall of your rectum. One showed that there's reduced risk of infection. But another study done just as valid said that there was no reduced risk of infection. So I don't know, what the heck. It's frustrating when we don't get, black and white answers to some of this stuff. Biopsies do carry risks. They acknowledge that, biopsies aren't entirely 100% safe. Mostly they're safe. Most men get them and they're fine. But some of the risks include sepsis. You can, as tiny of a risk as it is, you can actually die from a biopsy. They try and avoid things like your urethra tube. So if they are hitting your urethra, then you could have long-term complications from that. But because of imaging, we're seeing fewer biopsies. And when you're in a monitoring phase, whether you're a Gleason 6, a 3+3, and they put you on active surveillance, or whether you've done a prostatectomy and you're monitoring, they do a biopsy after a prostatectomy, but you've had radiation. That's the one I was thinking of. You have radiation and you're monitoring after the radiation. You don't necessarily go do a bunch of biopsies. So the standard of care used to be that if you were doing active surveillance, you're getting a biopsy every 3 to 6 months. Screw that. And now, even if they're recommending one a year, you may not have to. Why not just get an MRI once per year? So they said the biopsies are safer. They're still risky. They said that there's a reduced need of biopsies because of better imaging, which I thought that was a fantastic message. We talked about radioligand therapy. So this is where they take a radioactive isotope and they attach it to something that is absorbed by, taken up by, attached to cancer cells, or at least the membrane on the cancer cell, at least the PSMA or something like that. So the beauty of this is you're getting it's targeted radiation, but it's from the inside. So the first one they talked about was Pluvicto. Now, Pluvicto is lutetium-177, and it's already approved. So there are people that are getting Pluvicto and are getting that treatment, and it's working for some. It's not working as effectively for others. You do have to have active PSMA, which means active cancer, for that to work. But what was interesting is there were not vendors. They weren't selling anything. Supporters, people that were donating to prostate cancer treatment and research, and they had stands set up around the room, and they had representatives there. I'm struggling to find the right word, but sponsors. They had sponsors, and Telix was one of the sponsors. So Telix is developing another lutetium-177, radioligand therapy, targeted radiation. But there's a difference to this one. It's called TLX-591, lutetium-177, rosopatamab. It's in phase 3 trials right now. So the difference is it's all in about what they attach the lutetium to. So what you attach the radioactive isotope to. Now with Pluvicto, they've attached it to a molecule that's not small. I mean, molecules are small, but they've attached it to a molecule that limits the lutetium's ability to get into really close to all the cancer cells. So what this Telix has done is they picked a monoclonal antibody, which was smaller than this molecule, and they've attached the lutetium-177 to this monoclonal antibody, and so it gives them better targeting. They can get the lutetium-177 in closer. They can get it into all the nooks and crannies and crevices of the tumor, and better target the tumor, which I thought that was interesting. They also talked about and there's newer treatments and newer isotopes under development, like actinium. So yeah, The radioligand therapy is, what's exciting about it is it's attacking the cancer cells from the inside and it's sparing healthy tissue. It's still radiation, but it's radiation that's directly targeting the tumors. Now, that there are still protocols, like you become radioactive for some number of days after like a Pluvicto treatment. So as we develop better and better treatments, like we get the actinium, you're not going to be as radioactive because its energy is delivered so much more to the tumor. Yeah, so they had a lot of good stuff to say about the biopsies, about the imaging, and about the radioligand therapy. They also, I wish we'd have talked about the biomarker testing more. This is something I've learned I want to know more about. And what this is, biomarker tests, there's tests like a PCA3, a PHI, a 4K score, and Decipher. And I think Decipher is the one I hear come up most often. Now, I got one of these, but I don't know which one, and I don't know the results of my test. I will look through my chart. I've looked through my notes, and I didn't write down anything about my Decipher. I don't know if it was Decipher, my biomarker test. The only thing I did do a genetic test, which I think is different. See, there's more of this I need to know. Here's what they said. Here's what they said about the biomarker testing. They said it's changing how we diagnose. The tests like the PCA3, PHI, 4K score, and the Decipher are helping decide who needs a biopsy. So you can limit the number, you can cut back on the risk from a biopsy, limit the number of biopsies, and help develop what your treatment plan looks like based on your biomarker testing. So that's good. It reduces overdiagnosis. It reduces overtreatment. Speaking of overtreatment, the next one was focal therapies. I think this was the one I learned the most about. There's a lot of people that are doing cryo, ablation, other focal therapies. There's a problem. So they were really hesitant about this one. What they're saying is people with a Gleason 6, with a 3+3, are being told by their doctors that, hey, this focal therapy is available and you can do this. Well, they cautioned that, with if you're in that Gleason 6, active surveillance is probably the better option for you. And they said what they've learned about active surveillance is they used to say this is the band of people that should do active surveillance, this Gleason 6. Well, they've expanded that. They're saying some patients, based on the MRI imaging, based on the biomarker testing, if you are a Gleason 7 3+4, then maybe active surveillance is still something that's an option for you. They've expanded the band of who can wait to do any kind of active treatment. And the problem is, because these things are available and we get nervous, we're looking stuff up and what can I do? And then we're asking our doctors, and we advocate for our own treatment. So if we're asking the doctor, hey, what about this focal therapy? And I'm struggling to remember whatever the surgical laser knife and whatever some of these are. I didn't get into a lot of research on them because I was metastatic and they weren't an option for me at the time. But people are asking their doctors for them, and the doctor's like, okay, so this person wants this, so let's do that. And maybe they could have waited. The doctor's not going to advocate for you and say, really, the best thing you can do is active surveillance. If you ask for a treatment, they're going to give you the treatment. I'm sure it's tied to a little bit to the fact that the more treatment you get, the more money they get. But who knows? That's an assumption. These therapies, these focal therapies, aren't yet in the NCCN guidelines. So are they things you can do? Yes, but they caution. And then the other direction on this, they said one of the bigger problem they're seeing with focal therapies is people that should be getting more tougher, stronger. They should be getting the NCCN guideline treatments because of metastatic disease, because of complications, because of biomarker results, are doing focal therapies. They're doing these small local treatments, and they're under-treating men that are Gleason 7, 4+3, even Gleason 8. There are men with Gleason 8, 4+4, that are going for, I got to look this up because I'm struggling with the names, types of prostate cancer focal treatments, because it's hanging out right there. It's right on the edge of my head and I can think of it. cryotherapy, ultrasound, HIFU. That's the one I was trying to think of. HIFU, which is a high frequency, high intensity focused ultrasound. That's a focal therapy. But these focal therapies, the doctors were quick to point out, these are not curative. Removal is curative. Radiation is curative. They can do photodynamic therapy. They can do laser ablation and whatever irreversible electroporation is. But anyway, they do these different types of focal therapies, and they're not curative. And they're men that need curative treatments are trying them. All right, I babbled on that enough. Just be careful. If you are pursuing one of these types of HIFU, laser ablation, cryotherapy, any of these, even brachytherapies, focal therapy, right? These are things that are not in the NCCN guidelines. And if you are intermediate unfavorable, or higher risk, then consider sticking to the guidelines. And that was their recommendation. Delaying treatment. So they did a study that, because when we get diagnosed, the first thing we want to do is treat it. How do we kill this? How do we beat this? How do we overcome this? What do I need to do today that's going to help make me better? And we put a lot of pressure on our care team to get treatment. And so this study they did showed that men have, once you're diagnosed, you have up to 6 months or longer to decide without worsening your outcomes. So they took a group of men and split them in half, and they made half wait for 6 months, and they did active treatment or really early on the other half, and there was no difference in outcomes. So the importance of that is you do have time for second opinions. You do have time for sexual health counseling. That was something else we talked about, because that's outside of the doctor's specialty, right? They're there to diagnose. They're there to treat. They're not there to care about your sex life. And so there's a whole other part of your care team you need to bring on board to talk about counseling, talk about all that. Anyway, but you have time. And I didn't know this. I was pushing. Biopsy results came back at the end of June of 2023. And August 11th, I started my abiraterone. And August 30th or 21st, I got my Lupron shot, and then August 30th, I started my radiation. And I tried to get all that moved along as fast as possible. And I initially didn't get a second treatment. I didn't actively go get my own second opinion. In fact, my doctor had sent my biopsy results off on his own to get a second opinion. So I ended up getting a second opinion on where I was, the rating. Yeah. I talked to my urologist, I talked to my radiation oncologist, and I talked to a medical oncologist. And is that a second opinion? See, I don't think that's a second opinion. I think a second opinion is you talk to all the right people, your urologist, your medical oncologist, your radiation oncologist, and then you go to get an outside care team that's not invested financially into your treatment. And you give them all the information, and then you talk to them. And that's a second opinion. So the point is, we have time, and I wrote this quote down. This is fantastic. The right treatment is more important than the fast one. So yeah, that was really good. Speaking of doctors, there were communication gaps between doctors. Somebody, we had a chance to ask questions. So a lot of questions were being asked, and somebody said, "Hey, I don't feel like my urologist and my medical oncologist and my radiation oncologist are all talking." And the team of doctors, they all looked at each other like, "Oh, how honest do we get with this one? I don't know." And they answered honestly. They said, "They're probably not." And they did throw some excuses out there. We see in 20-minute blocks, throughout a day, we might see 5 people, we might see 20 people. There's a lot of things going on, and it's what we can get into your notes during what time we have with you is all we know about you. But the urologist was the one that said, if one of my patients says, "Hey, can you send these notes to so-and-so, my medical oncologist," then she will. And all 3 on the panel agreed that, yeah, if we're asked to communicate something with the other doctors, then that's important. And this is why, and they had a, this is why. They said this is why it's important, so that you can, if you have a question, you've asked your urologist a question, and you go to your radiation oncologist, you look at that radiation oncologist and you ask the same question. Say, okay, did my urologist send you the notes? Yes. I asked this question based on everything that they're saying. What do you think? And they can give you their medical expertise on that. And maybe it, even though a radiation oncologist has a different specialty than a urologist, we're still talking about prostate cancer diagnosis and treatment. And so they can give you an opinion. But you need to ask the doctor to include the others in the notes. They don't automatically talk to each other, which is frustrating. That's something I didn't know when I was going through my diagnosis and even starting my treatment. I assumed they were all talking together, and I got lucky because my original radiation oncologist, as good at Dr. Brian Lewenda, was fantastic, and he always took it upon himself to stay in touch with the medical oncologist. So the medical oncologist was getting my notes, was getting information, and I was able to talk to either of them as if I was talking to both of them, because they both had all the same information. And that was just lucky. I got lucky. Most people aren't going to get that lucky. The other thing they said they can do, we can do, is bring copies of our records to the appointments. It's going to take a little longer. They have to review stuff that they haven't seen yet. Yeah. All right, this next topic, this comes with a disclaimer. I know not everybody's going to be on board with this idea. Okay. They talked about AI and prostate cancer. So what they're doing is they're doing studies to see, are there any benefits of introducing AI into the diagnosis and treatment path? So what they're finding is AI is identifying patients. For example, one example they used, they ran all the records, all the scans, all the data of patients and what the doctors determined was needed through AI. And AI was catching that doctors were prescribing excess treatment to patients that didn't need it. And what that meant specifically, the specific example was hormone therapy post-radiation. There were more men getting hormone therapy post-radiation that didn't need it. And so when the doctors re-reviewed the AI results, they look at the data and they're like, yeah, this person probably didn't need hormone therapy. This person probably didn't need hormone therapy. Another example they used was on scans. Scans are, the risk with a scan is the same as being told, hey, there's a $20 bill in that pile of rocks. So I want you to actually not, so that's the analogy. The analogy is, hey, I want you to look through that pile of rocks and see if there's a $20 bill in there. And so we go digging. And when we find the $20 bill, we're done looking. And doctors can tend to do that as well. So what happens, what they're finding with AI is they're reviewing these scans and they're finding anomalies that doctors have missed. And he gave a half a dozen examples, including kidney stones, including brain tumors, because like on a PSMA PET scan, it's a head to toe scan. You get MRI, CT, you're getting a huge chunk of your body scanned. And when the AI is reviewing these, the AI is not looking for the single $20 bill in the rock pile and then stopping. It's looking at everything. And so AI is catching anomalies that doctors missed. So there is a positive idea of a doctor looking at your scan, sending it through an AI tool, and then seeing if there was anything that missed. So, yeah. Yeah, that's weird. The other one is patient focused. And when we're going through and we're getting, our diagnosis and our treatment, and we're getting told a bunch of stuff and we're trying to take notes. Hopefully we're taking notes. It can be overwhelming, and we walk out and we don't remember everything we heard, and we misremember some of the stuff we heard. And the Zero Prostate Cancer, that group, is developing an AI support tool which is trained on the NCCN guidelines. It's trained on zero cancer materials. It's trained on doctor's notes. It's trained on all the information that will help guide patients. So this AI tool, the idea is you go for a diagnosis, or you get diagnosed, you talk to your doctor, you step away, and the doctor says, all right, we'll meet in 2 weeks, and you can tell me what you want to do. Well, you can go to this AI tool and say, here's all my situation. I'm a Gleason 7, 4+3. I have a potential MET in my spine. These are the recommendations. And it can say, here's why the doctor's looking at this. Here's why radiation may be a better tool in this case. Here's why here's the side effects. That's one big thing, is it'll talk about all the side effects. You'll be able to get all the information that maybe your doctor's not thinking about, or is maybe even uncomfortable talking about, right? When you get into sexual health, sexual function, some of these doctors, some of these old school doctors just don't talk about it. They don't. Yeah, it's frustrating. But the Zero's developing an AI support trained on all this information to help give us guidance towards making our decision. Yeah. Crazy. All right, Zero's expanded mission. So prostate cancer deaths are on the rise in advanced cases. So what are they doing to fix it? They're like, if there are still people that are dying from advanced metastatic disease, then we're not doing enough. If there's people that are getting diagnosed and don't understand their treatment options, we're not doing enough. They were very good about what can we do to help people out, and so they have new programs, especially targeting two underserved communities that are at high risk for prostate cancer: Black men and veterans. These two communities, they're focusing on to come out with new programs to say, hey, how can we help? Here's something you need to know. Here's something your doctor may not have talked about, whatever that looks like. And they're bringing in more volunteers. Zero Prostate Cancer is asking for volunteers who will begin calling newly diagnosed men within 48 hours. That's awesome. That is fantastic. Can you imagine? I can imagine. That would have been, I get diagnosed, I'm spiraling, I have no idea what's going on, and I start pulling up my computer, I'm looking at a bunch of stuff, it's overwhelming information, and 2 days later could you imagine getting a phone call saying, hey, let's say I'm a volunteer. Can you imagine getting a phone call saying, hey, my name's Jason, I have prostate cancer, I've been through this, and I'm here to help you. Darn it. So they're working on that. Yeah, they're working on that. That's going to be awesome. Hopefully I'm going to get a chance to volunteer to do that, because I would love to help people out. I would love somebody to have that voice. All right. They've created a new veteran division. And then for the Black community, there are 2 cities where men are getting diagnosed with prostate cancer at a much higher rate than other cities, especially Black men, and that's Atlanta and Baltimore. So they're launching specific outreach programs for those areas and for those communities, the veterans and then the Black communities, especially in Atlanta and Baltimore. Yeah, holy smokes. What else? What else is in my notes here? You'd think I'd have those pulled up. There it is. No, yeah, I did an interview with Bayer. So Bayer makes Nubeqa. Nubeqa, which is darolutamide, is an androgen receptor inhibitor used to treat non-metastatic and metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer. It's known for fewer side effects on cognition and fatigue compared to similar drugs. Now, it's not a replacement to abiraterone. It's not a replacement to Lupron. It's taken with hormone therapy. It's an oral pill. It's usually well tolerated. And yeah, it's often used in combination with chemo in advanced cases. So now men with a more advanced disease will do chemo and darolutamide, the Nubeqa. We talked about the new lutetium 177. PSMA PET, I didn't finish talking about that. Yeah. So a PSMA PET scan is a prostate-specific membrane antigen, positron emission tomography. Those words don't mean anything. It uses a radioactive tracer to visualize where the PSMA is concentrated in the body. So it's used in suspected metastatic disease. It's more sensitive than traditional imaging like CT or bone scans. That's what I was talking about that's the gold standard in diagnostic. I'm just going to go through my notes here and see if there's anything else I missed. Rotten part of an apple, annual biopsies. Now they do MRIs before deciding to do a biopsy. So yeah, if you're in like active surveillance or some other situation where they would normally do regular biopsies, now they look at the MRI, they look at the imaging, they look at your blood work. And if all the markers are stable, they may not do excessive biopsies. Another situation where PSMA PET scan may not be approved is if you are less than unfavorable intermediate. So you're a Gleason 6, you're 3+3, or you're a Gleason 7, 3+4. Ask anyway. Some people are getting them approved and finding issues that they wouldn't have caught otherwise. Random biopsies shouldn't be done anymore. We talked about that. No more just random biopsies. Back on the PSMA PET scan. So there was a question in the audience about, hey, I didn't feel comfortable. My doctor was talking about this PSMA PET scan, but he was kind of shying away from it and wasn't comfortable. Like, this is something you can ask for, but we probably don't need it. He was, saying they didn't need to do one. The doctor said the U.S. was one of the last countries to approve and start using PSMA PET scans. What that means, his point to that was, there are some situations where there can be false positives as doctors are gaining experience with this imaging method. And what has happened is, out there, when the U.S. started using these, some doctors were getting false positives, and then they get roasted for it, they get sued for it, they get in trouble. And so other doctors see that in their notes, in the notes that all the doctors get, and then they shy away from it. So just, if your doctor is not wanting you to get one anyway. Go see a different doctor, because they are getting more experience with it. And as they gain experience with that imaging method, they start to understand what indications are positive and which are possibly accumulations. This was something that they said that I didn't know. So you get a lot of uptake in the gut, the liver, the kidneys, and some people accidentally diagnose those as positive sites of cancer when they're not. Thyroid, one of the doctors said that thyroids have the same PSMA cells as prostate cancer. And so some people are getting diagnosed with prostate cancer in their thyroid when it's not. Isn't that weird? Yeah. The thyroid, especially in certain benign conditions like thyroid nodules, Graves' disease, or thyroiditis, can light up on a PSMA PET scan. Another thing they said is a PET scan can't pick up tumors smaller than a couple millimeters. I should have just done this from my notes and not my summary of notes. Yeah, they can't pick up things smaller than a couple millimeters. So that a PSMA PET scan being clear doesn't mean you're clear. It just means there's nothing larger than a couple millimeters. 91% predictive. Yeah, the candidates for active surveillance have expanded based on success with sparing patients from unnecessary treatment. Biomarkers, NCCN guidelines, communication, radioligand therapy, PLTO, AI. Yeah, and then they, at the end of the doctors panel, they reinforced that prostate cancer doesn't have early warning signs. There are no symptoms in early stage prostate cancer. Screening is the only way to find it early. So we must advocate for screening. And there's still YouTube channels out there saying, the early sign of prostate cancer is if you're peeing blood. No, that's a late sign. Blitz program, like I talked about, AI tool, new community. Yeah. Then we had lunch. All right. I hope you got something out of this. One thing I want to make sure I touch on is I met a lot of great people. I scheduled at least 2 more, maybe 3 more interviews I'll be doing. Yeah, including another Texas one. What is up with the interviews from Texas? They showed up to represent. Yeah, a guy from Houston. But one of the interviews I scheduled was with David Diaz. Now, for those of you that stuck around this long, often when we first get diagnosed, we run across a support group, an online support group called the Reluctant Brotherhood. And David Diaz runs that. It used to be a guy whose name I can't remember now, but he's turned it all over to David, and David is doing fantastic things with that. It used to be like Wednesdays, one night a week, and now almost most nights of the week you can find an online support group through the Reluctant Brotherhood. So I got to talk with David a lot, and we're going to be doing an episode where I've got him scheduled for an interview. So looking forward to that. We're going to find out his story, because that's something that he doesn't necessarily get to share as much as he's in the support group leader role running the Reluctant Brotherhood. So we're going to get to find out his story and his journey. Yeah, I got to see and hang out with Peter O'Connor, who we did an episode with some time ago, and that was fantastic. I first met him at last year's prostate cancer support group leader event, and yeah, That's awesome. So I'm just babbling now. I think that's everything I wanted to say. I just want you to know this: if you're watching this and you're feeling overwhelmed, you're newly diagnosed, you are not alone. There are support groups out there. This is a support group. That's what this has turned into. This used to be just an outlet for me, and now it's turned into a support group. There are local support groups. There are online support groups through zerocancer.org. You can find a local or an online support group. Go to the Reluctant Brotherhood. But there are people like me and others like me who are here to help you and be with you as you go through your diagnosis and treatment. You are not alone. And that's the one thing that when you're getting diagnosed and you're getting all these options and you're getting weighed down with this, you have to make a decision. We can feel isolated. We can feel alone. We can feel like, why did this happen to me? And it's happened to us. And so I'm here. We're all here. You have people out there that want to help. All right. If this helped you, please subscribe, leave a comment. If you've had any unusual experiences with PSMA imaging or radioligand therapy or biomarker testing, I'm especially interested in biomarker testing, leave a comment. Let's keep that conversation going. And be sure to check out the tools at zerocancer.org. And if you haven't yet attended or checked it out, be sure to check out the Reluctant Brotherhood. All right. It's been fun. I hope you got something out of this. Love you all.